Thanks, you guys. Heather McGowan invited me, and she said, Kenneth, can you present on your mistakes? Like, yeah, thanks, Heather. I appreciate that I'm going to be talking about my mistakes, and I have plenty. What I wanted to do is share with you case studies, stories that of products that are actually out now, or at least I can talk about. One of the issues, as you'll find, is that in the design process, it's iterative, it's early, and often it's secretive. These are not secretive. You can film this, you can talk about it. One of the things I want to do is first introduce myself a little bit more, but that was an awesome introduction. Thanks, you guys. Not too long ago, I was in school, and I was a designer. Loved design, graphic design, illustration. When I discovered that there was a thing called product design, I was blown away because I thought problem solving, how perfect is this? And I went to a school on the West Coast called Art Center. But I was given a title when I went to work called Envisioner. And I was privileged because I actually was able to get the first title of Envisioner. And what we decided was that there was something fundamentally different about designing the idea before the idea gets designed. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But it's important to understand what we're designing before you actually get into the kind of hardcore engineering of it. And that's a little bit of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the process of that. And so over 12 years ago, I started at Continuum. And only recently I've become more independent, where I can now contract with different companies. But the reason why I was there for 12 years is that I was able to work on some really cool projects with some really cool companies. Some of them are pretty mundane, like Rubbermaid. Others seem a little more sexy, like our concept projects with General Motors. And other projects that we worked on, I just had no idea I would be designing mutual funds. So one thing I wanted to share with you guys is that design can happen on a toaster, a toothbrush, but more and more, and what I'm really excited to hear about as I was able to sit a little bit part of the IDP class, is that design and design thinking can really be applied to almost any experience. And that's actually what I want to talk about, is the experience that people have, and that we have a role in that, and we have actually a responsibility in that. And it sounds very important, but it's really messy, and we make mistakes, and that's what I wanted to talk a little bit about, are the mistakes that often happens. I just want to briefly talk about one of the products that recently came out with Oric. I mean, in my mind, when I went to school, it's like product design, it's all about beautiful, shiny things. And while I was actually mid through school, one of the issues that I discovered was the issue of, why are we designing this? You know, like, why does anyone need a new vacuum? One of the things I discovered is it was less about how things looked for me and more about why we were doing it. Why are we designing it? And that's one of the things that I fell in love with when I discovered Continuum, is that unlike where I was in your seat, no one really shared that with me. It was a very structured around technique, around designing products, and it was really about how products work with products and products work with people, but not how people work with not only the products, but the overall experience. Just in my short time, the field has changed quickly. And I'm excited to hear that you guys actually are changing. You guys are getting an experience that I never had that actually very much mimics the design process that we go through at Continuum. And for me, it's all about people. Or at least it starts with people and it ends with people. And I'll talk about the process in between. These are some of the interviews I was able to work on. It's talking with really the stakeholders that are out there, right? It's the nurses, if it's a medical product, it's consumers wherever they're at, been to China, Indonesia. You go where you need to find the stories and you need to understand the people. You guys have a process, we have a process. The processes really parallel with each other. As I was noticing on the glass that was printed out with the various process principles, our language is slightly different, but pretty much the intent is the same. The idea of going out, learning, researching, discovering something, but rather than jumping directly from the the insight to an idea, having time to do analysis, thinking about it. Does this make sense? Does it not make sense? Envisioning, we'll talk a little bit more about that. That's actually designing the overall experience. The two that are on the ends, I've learned more often, is something that's really important to our clients, and that is alignment. Do they actually understand the problem that's in front of them? We actually take time to talk about what problem we're trying to solve, alignment, and this issue around deployment. I would encourage you to talk to your teachers a bit more about the idea of not only coming up with a final idea, but how do you make that idea exist and survive through a company and it not just get watered down with time. As much as we want to say there's a very crisp, clean process on how you do design, it is messy. One of the things that I've appreciated over time is I think by staging out the process, that gives me comfort, a perception of control, that we can actually control this artistic process of design. But one of the things I've discovered is it's organic, it's messy, and at all times we make mistakes. And I'm going to share some of those mistakes with you. One of the things that I'm going to introduce is this idea of failing fast. So this presentation that I'm doing right now, one of the questions that I have is, can I share this presentation and talk to you about some of the failures, but at the same time share the idea that it's not so much about the failures, but it's about working through the failures, not allowing it to hold you back, but actually allowing yourselves to go like, well, that didn't work out. Well, let's try something else new. Wanted to let you know that Continuum, a global industrial design company, one of the things that it's probably best known for is this thing called a Swiffer. In mid-90s, we actually got the project. I wasn't on it, but I heard stories about it. We were really excited about the insights that we gleaned, that cleaning the cleaning device, the mop, took as much time as to clean the floor. No one likes to touch the yucky stuff. Now we live in a day in which the idea of a Swiffer makes sense. Now, it may not fit me, or it might fit me, but I have to say, it's over $1 billion, it's one of their first $1 billion brands from scratch. And one of the things that happened is we felt very passionate about the insights because we did the qualitative research, but they wanted to now quantify it. Testing, it's what companies do really well, and P&G does it very well, and that was the biggest flop in the test. It's here, right? It's out. What we discovered is how it was being tested was the problem. There were definitely issues with the Swiffer back at that time that was being developed. But the tenacity to say, are we actually getting the information that we need? Are we getting the insights and working through? And actually what we've done since is actually design a new test so that we can actually gauge how people understand something that they've never seen before. The reason why it didn't work well is because it didn't exist. Sometimes tests work well because if I have a red car and I want to test, do people like blue cars? It's pretty easy. You can say, here's a car, do you like red, do you like blue? But when you're designing for innovation where there's something that's never existed before, that test doesn't work. So we actually had to design a completely new test where you had to basically design an experiential model, basically simulate that experience as close as possible. And once we were able to do this in a small quantitative study, it took them 3 years to have the confidence to launch it. So from when we got the project, it took about 3 years before it actually got to market. And that's pretty common. So the fact that I'm showing you some stuff that's 3 to 5 years old, I apologize. It's kind of one of the things that just happens naturally. A little harder to see this slide. One of the things that's easy to see is this idea of the idea. And maybe that's what we can talk about. Are we designing a thing? I would say what's important is to understand that we're designing an idea first, because once we have clarity on the idea, how it actually gets implemented, well, we can do many ways to implement, but if the idea is fundamentally wrong, I don't care if it's red or blue, shiny or not shiny, it won't work. One of the things that I was taught at school was this idea of problem solving. That has not gone away. Problem solving is really at the core. If you fundamentally can't get a product to work right, then for the most part, no one's going to buy it. But people are really sophisticated these days. Everyone is almost talking about marketing speak. When I do interviews, they actually have the sense of how things are made. What's happening today that I would say that is important to understand now is that it's not enough to solve just the problem. It's important to know, in a sense, the values or the aspirations of who you're designing for. And that's the trick. And I think one of the things that I'm going to talk about is how do you connect the values to the problems? That's been the approach. I think that's allowed me the confidence to make big blunders and still push through, because I know at the end of the day, if I don't get the idea right, if I at least understand people's values, what they aspire, if I can design that experience the right way, I'll get closer to the idea, and I won't just think I'm a failure. So, in a sense, this is my true north. This is my way of having a sense that even when I do fail, I know that if I can connect the problems to the values, all will be good. And for the most part, they are. Sometimes they're not. But here we go. One of the things I want to do is take 3 case studies. I was able to sit part of a little bit of the IDP class was sharing where they are in their process. They were able to share where they're at. I've chosen 3 case studies, but rather than just choosing maybe a classic product problem, I've chosen a problem that we've been given a challenge, one that's a web service, one that's a product, and one that's designing an overall service experience. And what was important for me to communicate to you guys is that even though the process is clearly delineated, it can be scaled. You can scale it to handle websites, products, toothbrushes, cars, mutual funds, diapers. I've done it all. But along the way, one of the things was shared with me is, how can we tell that story? How can we possibly help, how can I help you guys be able to bring your story out there, to tell your story in class? And so we'll finish a little bit with tips around storytelling. But one thing I wanted to quickly do is my little preamble, which actually is not so short now. I wanted to open this up and say, we have an opportunity to do 3 case studies. What do you guys want to know? I've been doing this for like 12 years. There's an opportunity here to talk about ways that maybe we can learn from mistakes. What are the things that you guys might have or want to know that I could talk about?
How well do those mistakes go over in the professional world?
So the question is, right, so the question is, how well does it go over? If I make the mistake, how well does it go with the boss? I would actually increase that to talk about how well does it go with a client who just spent $250,000 to solve a problem. That's a good one. I'll try to capture that one.
How often do mistakes lead to new opportunities?
Oh, thank you for asking that. That's like the perfect question. How can mistakes lead to better opportunities, newer opportunities? I think that's actually what it's all about. It's that when you actually push yourself out there and you stumble, I think that's when you can actually see clarity for the first time. I'll try to answer that one with the laptop project. We'll tell you what, I'll be speaking. I'm going to be a little mindful of our time as well. One of the things that I'll do is just jump right into this. And if you do have questions specifically, raise your hands. We'll go through this. But I'll first just talk about a project from Fidelity. The theme on this one is, you are not the target consumer. Let me just repeat that. You are not the target consumer. The reason why I have to say that, and it's actually something we say to our clients all the time. In fact, we actually give them a t-shirt. And a t-shirt actually says, I am not the target consumer, but it's written backwards so that they walk into a mirror, they'll actually see they are not the target consumer. The important thing about iterating and reiterating that is that often and not, when we need to make decisions, we lean on how we feel about something. That's good if it's a product of 1, but when you need a product of 100, 1,000, 10,000. I actually am about to make a presentation tomorrow with my client. They gave us a challenge of finding a $144 million opportunity. Where they come up with that number, I have no idea, but it's a big number, and I don't want to trust my opinion. I want to trust the opinion of my process, my team, and all the rigor that we went into in understanding what the problem is, as well as how can we solve that. And the way that we can do that is we get outside of ourselves and actually get into whomever we're designing for. Fidelity, it's a finance company. It's an investment company. Some of you might have investments with Fidelity. They also do banking, and I never thought I'd be doing design for a finance company. But here we are, and they actually asked us, how do you spend money during retirement? They wanted to bring innovation to their product services, but for them, a product is a mutual fund. I'm going to tell you a story. This is Stan and Marilyn, and this is their balcony view. I took this photo about 8 years ago. They've achieved their retirement dream. I had a couple of questions as I did this interview, and I left the interview not quite understanding, why does Marilyn keep over $100,000 in cash at the bank while Stan will wait to get the shutoff notice before he pays his bills? I have to say, these were probably one of the most sophisticated, money-oriented consumers I've come across, mainly because they've understood and applied, but in a sense, what I was hearing from them just wasn't jiving. Freakonomics is a really good book. I recommend it. We're not logical people, and we needed to understand the logic about how could someone who's doing so successful keep money basically burning, making no money in a bank and waiting for shutoff notices. So here's the problem that they came to us with. This is Fidelity. A little harder to see this, I'll try to describe, but we can read from here that what they needed was a website service to help people manage money during retirement. So you can't get access to it, I can't get access to it, but when we're retired, you would sign up for this service and it would help you manage your money. How to meaningfully connect with customers. They created this product. Let's say their client base was 100,000 people, maybe like 2,000 people was using it. Pretty big disconnect if no one's using it. And I have the word metaphor here. It's a little hard to see this, but it's more like a plumber's diagram that has money and like channels funneling the money to different vats of moneyness. And that's literally what they were showing with their client. That was their metaphor, was like tubes. So what we did is what you do here every day. You go out, you learn, you talk to people, you understand, not just Marilyn and Stan, but a lot of different people who represent the customers. We take time to analyze, map their behaviors, activities, clarify what the essence of what they were trying to do. So it's not just Marilyn and Stan's story, it's the general story. What people that represent them, what is their story? And then once we understand that, now I can design something once that we understand the critical experiences to design. We even go back and we'll go back to Marilyn and Stan and we talk to them, we evaluate. And I wanted to share in this that this is their current website, or maybe this was the website 3 years ago. One of the things that we might not be able to read here, but you can see little diagrams with kind of pipes going on here. I can read you some of this stuff, but even if I read it, I've studied the finances quite a bit, I still don't understand this. What we fundamentally learned is they're giving a lot of data, but low understanding. They're giving a lot of information that the client feels is important, but obviously the customer doesn't. So here's a client who feels very proud about all this information. We know all your information, here's your information. They're giving it to you all on this one page. Isn't this really great of us to give you all this information on one page, and no one understands it? It's written in financial language, they have no confidence in it, and there's actually some really cool things going on here, but it's completely hidden. All this effort has been put into someone creating this experience and no one using it. Literally, like a fraction of the potential not being there. I'm going to bring back two people. This isn't Stan Marilyn. A little hard to see on the left, it says life mindset, and on the right it says future mindset. I would say everybody, you and me, we kind of have two approaches to money. And this was our little key insight. When we think about money, we either think about life, cash, or the future, investments. Okay, so that was our internal speak with the team. Let me break that on down. Life means, what am I going to buy today? Can I afford to pay the bills? Is my student loan going to come in time? You know, it's the day-to-day, and in fact, for whatever reason in life, month-to-month way of how we live our lives. Now, for some of us, the idea of needing to be comfortable in the future, people will put money off to the side. We call that future management. We all do it, but we don't do it at the same time, and meaning our mindsets either is in life management or future management. And in couples, we usually see that one will take responsibility for one and the other will take responsibility for the other. Well, if you have that insight, what does that mean? So this is what we would call an envisioned experience. This is our way to talk with a team. And let me quickly share what's on here. This is like a fake website. This actually is best shown on paper. And on the left, it says Fidelity Guidance. We think Fidelity has good stuff to say when they know how to talk to you. But what we did is we created two spaces, a life mindset and a future mindset, where it's going to talk about life management and future management in their own place. Let me click further. What we recommended is that you have two logins if you're a couple. If I'm typically the person who's managing day to day, I want to know how much money's in my cash, in my bank account. I want to know what transaction has just recently happened. You know, but if my wife or my husband is dealing with a portfolio, well, they'll look at that portfolio section. That's their job. So this idea of understanding how people think and translating it to the right experience changed the website fundamentally. Two logins makes sense, but it actually maps a bit more to how people value something. And so one of the things that we learned from this is that not only do I not understand Stan and Marilyn because I'm not retired, I needed to empathize with them, the clients needed to empathize. And at the end of the day, we need to remind ourselves to step outside of your perspective, and maybe even your clients too. You know, maybe the people who are hiring you actually don't understand what's going on. And I want to just share this phrase of empathy over ego. It's really about them. And the good thing about doing that, if it's about them, is I don't have to justify the idea anymore. I can say like, no, this is what's important to people because I've talked to them. We've mapped it out. And so it's not my idea versus your idea. It's like, no, what idea best fits the target person? And that's one of the biggest mistakes I see time and time again. And I have to say that it happens to me. I left my company. I actually helped a little startup. So I just want to share, this happens, and in fact, I ran into this problem myself earlier this year. I helped a company start up a online business where basically you order food and it gets delivered to you. It's more like a weeknight delivery. And one of the things that was interesting that I realized is the people who was designing this were bachelors, designing things so that it was like packaged nice and neat in little trays and was very convenient for me. But we learned that's not who our target consumer is. Our target person wants to share the meal with a family. They want to sit down family meal. And if they don't have to cook it, at least they want to be able to properly serve it. So here I am, I'm wanting like bachelor chow, when I realized the target person, they want more of a traditional experience. So the idea of literally just repackaging something so that you could serve out of a dish rather than not getting these little plastic trays. I make the mistakes all the time, and so I have to remind myself. So it's these mistakes that we come across, and when I actually realized this, we've actually hit the pause button on the website as we retool and figure this out. So it happens all the time. It's just good to remind yourself, step outside of yourself, empathy over ego. One of the things I wanted to share a little bit is the One Laptop Per Child project. For those who may not be as familiar with it, actually, is there anyone who knows about the project? Anyone who doesn't know what the One Laptop Per Child project is? A couple hands. So let me talk about it a little bit. And maybe one of the things I can do is just say before I leave this slide, it's not all about design. Now, I can say that, because it's not all about marketing and it's not all about technology. What I wanted to share on this one is the idea that as a designer, I look through the world in my designer lens. So for me, if I think something's a success or a failure, it's because of the design, right? Of course it is. Well, one of the problems with that is that when you have that lens, it's really difficult to kind of make enough space to bring in other options and other insights. And actually, at the beginning of this project, this is the problem that we ran into. Today, if you were to go to One Laptop Per Child website, you'll see an image like this. The inspiration of this project was started by Nicholas Negroponte. He's a founder of the MIT Media Lab. Basically a really, really smart, geeky guy who started up a special division at MIT. I really admired him. And I actually was sitting on a plane. And the funny, I'm sorry, I'm gonna give a stupid side story, but I will. My boss had back problems, and we were flying from Boston to California. He got first class because of his back problems. Whatever, he can do whatever he wants, he's the boss. I didn't know this. I just told the travel person, like, yeah, copy whatever he had, realizing that I got first class, which was pretty awesome. And he came up to me while I was mid-flight, and he said, do you know who you're sitting next to? Which I thought was a little awkward because he said that loud enough to the person next to me, understanding what he said. And so we just awkwardly look at each other. He was sitting in A1, I was sitting in B1. That was Nicholas Negroponte, someone who I actually admire. I read one of his books. He's a very geeky kind of a guy, but a pretty prominent person. And he asked me, oh, do you know about this low-cost laptop project? And I kind of feigned like, oh, I heard something about that. I must have read something on the web. And what he said, this is what I want to do. I want every child to be able to have a laptop just as easy it is to have a pencil. That if every child, particularly in developing nations, has that tool, change will happen. And his theory was, if we can make that laptop affordable enough, perhaps maybe rather than spending 4 years worth of books, maybe you just spend all that money on a laptop, put the books on the laptop, maybe we can do it. Now, it was a pretty audacious idea, even back then, and we're talking like 7 years ago, and actually now I think about it. Because laptops back then were like $3,000, $5,000. What? $100 laptop? And so what do I say? Well, I just worked on a low-cost diaper, which I actually did. And so for some reason we're talking about laptops and diapers, and I'm a designer, and I'm like, hey, you need to do design because it's all about design, right? He's like, no, it's all about cost cutting. But I like what you're talking about. You know, we'll bring you in once we figure this out. Basically, we're saying, we'll bring you in so that you can do the pretty shiny stuff. It's basically what he said. And so we carried on this email correspondence back and forth, back and forth. What he wanted to do, as I described, is a fully functional laptop, basically to sell for around $100. What he also wanted to do is have it primarily focused on developing nations. What he also wanted to do is have it not just be a laptop, but potentially be an ebook, a tablet, laptop, other. There is other. So how do you do that? Well, I got a call about 2 months after he started the project. He's like, yeah, we might need some help. And this is why they needed some help. They needed some help because once you start understanding, going back to the previous idea, the target consumer, we realize we're dealing with a different environment that I'm used to. Shared anecdotal facts like the brightest light source in some of these homes is the laptop. That sometimes they would actually use the laptop to do other things like cook food because literally it was the brightest device. Like, I don't even think about that. How would I even think about that? And that's just at the home. What do you think about traveling back and forth? You know, you're having to deal with potentially dust or moisture. What does that do to a laptop? Like, I wouldn't even trust this to go outside without my, all my in-case protection. So one of the things that we did early on is try to summarize as much learning as we can. So we did talk to people, we did go out there, we did talk to experts. We talked to experts in Brazil and people in Africa It's a little hard to see here. I think one of the most powerful things anyone can do as a designer is to tell your story, tell it visually if you can, engage people. This is one of the ways that we were actually able to talk to one another. We're talking to engineers, we're talking to business folk. They want to understand what's going on, and we have these pictures. They're like, oh, I understand. You wanted to use it like a book and maybe like a tablet and I don't know, maybe like a game machine. And actually that sketch led to it actually having a D-pad similar to like a Nintendo. And one of the issues that was starting to come up that I could not quite understand until almost the end of the project is we were considered the designers and that they wanted to talk to the engineers after they talked to the business people. And what was happening was we got into these siloed conversations. And this is actually a blurred out shot because this is Nicholas with his kind of a signature pinstripe shirt. And he's talking to Gaurav, one of our best engineers, and literally complaining that he can't fit a C-sized battery in something smaller than a C-sized space. And Gaurav is like, you can't break the laws of physics. And Nicholas is like, oh, we can figure out how to do something. And we would get in these heated arguments where, for some reason, we weren't getting the right people together in a room to think through this, that we were, in a sense, getting handed down information. And the only way that we could communicate with each other initially was first drawing it out and kind of like passing it underneath the doors to each other because we were very partitioned. Well, that changed. That changed because fundamentally we didn't have enough time to get this done. And so what we did is we actually pulled in a summit. It's like a design summit. It's like, let's bring in the hardware people, the software people, the user interface people, the mechanical, the electrical, the product, the distribution, the marketing, the manufacturing, the channel people. We had these big symposiums. In fact, one of the biggest ones we had actually was at Google, who was one of the sponsors. And it was one of these very surreal moments where you're sitting there like, am I actually sitting with Sergey from Google, who's sitting next to like this head guy from Red Hat, who's like the software dude. And it was one of these moments where you're like, this is like a model UN, you know, except instead of different nations, it represented all the different silos that it takes to make something. And one of the things I love about this place is at the stage one, it's not the designers over here and the business people over here. It's not the marketing over here and it's not the technical people over here, that you all have a place at the table. And I know this doesn't quite make sense because it's so common sense. Why wouldn't you have the right people together? But for some reason, the industry is still challenged not to bring the people together. And more often than not, I will share this. When we have a meeting, we'll say, hey, yeah, bring your engineers. We want to talk to your technologists and your distribution people. More often than not, they're introducing each other to themselves just as much as they're introducing it to us. So this idea that these people work at the same place year after year are just in their own little divisions. So this idea of collaboration feels natural to me, hopefully it feels natural to you, is not feeling so natural out there. I can say though, as a role within design, by being able to literally sketch out different things, it's almost like the Rosetta Stone. If you can draw out something simple on a napkin, you can talk to an engineer, or you draw out a business model, then you invite the business person along with you as well. And one of the things I loved just seeing in the IDP class was this idea of rapid prototyping and modeling and trying different things out. This was the first iteration of the one laptop per child. This was really just to say, hey, we're thinking about the idea, here's an experience. This is made out of plastic wood. I mean, there is nothing technologically feasible about this, but what we were trying to do is capture what the right experience is. Once we did that, actually the real people started to call. AMD called, Quanta Computer, which makes actually almost everyone's computer, but no one knows about it, called Nicholas and said, okay, let's figure this out. Not too far after this meeting with the UN, it became real. And so it's a little hard to see with this one. This is a product from Continuum. And once we figured out this, then they were able to go to Fuse Design to basically, in a sense, skin it or finish the product. In my humble opinion, this is actually one of the hardest slides to show, largely in part because with that much thinking to get it finished by another company with my design hat, I get frustrated. I get a little pissed off. I get pissed off that Fuse project basically stole the project from me. But that's me as the designer saying like, it's all about design. No, it's real, it's out there. And one of the things that I love about this project now is that this wasn't the first one, and I know this won't be the last one. That is just a fraction of the models that we made. You know, some of those models are nothing more than a couple pieces of paper and some latches and a battery, and you'd be like, oh, what if we did this? Other models probably have been, you know, over a couple of weeks in making, but it's about iteration. It's not being bogged down about a dogma of like, this is the right idea. It's about iteration. And that's one of the things I just wanted to talk about, is that I've been saying that it's not about design. What I'm really trying to say is it's not about one dogma, right? It's not about marketing or technology. No, what we need to do in general is be a bridge, collaborate, be cross-functional, be pliable, be a versatile thinker. And one of the things I love about the program here is you switch up how you think. You're writing, you're drawing, you're building, you're acting, you're doing technical stuff, you're doing analytical stuff. That's actually what makes a good thinker. And it's a common mistake to think just as an engineer or just as a business person. And in fact, you'll often see people taking that as pride. Well, I'm the business person, you're the artist, you do that. No, that's not how it works. So I think that's the fundamental mistake, is that when you start to hold those barriers, screw the barriers, be the bridge, break the walls down, be messy, they won't like it. But in the end, what I will say about this product, even though it was messy, it's out there. And it's one of the great projects that I was very privileged to work on, because it was a pain in the ass. We made tons of mistakes, but these are some of the things I take away from that project. Please. Yes. Right. You know, I'll repeat the question. She's, and forgive me if I don't quite paraphrase it just right. My understanding of the question is, we've created this artifact, this thing that is now out there, particularly in these developing nations, in which children are going to be able to have a tool, a technology that the adults, their parents won't know about it. Like, how does that affect culture, right? What type of impact does it have on culture? Is that partially capturing the spirit of the idea? And I would actually say I think that's what we could say right now. That right now, whether it's issues of social networks, whether it's issues of just technology, whether it's actually this program, I think a lot of the experimentation is happening early on, and it's you guys that are actually going to be teaching me, how do you work together? So I'm actually, I don't mean to be coy about answering the question. I think a couple of thoughts that I have is that just getting a tool, what we've learned already in the field is it helps the family. And it's interesting how the kids are teaching the parents how to web browse. The kids are teaching actually their families, some who'd have like a little sari store, like a little business, and how to do accounting on the computer. So I think that's a good bridge, that it doesn't have to be just from top down or bottom up, but it's just a new tool, and that in this case the tool is starting with the child. There's an anecdotal thing that I heard where the way that they got fire safety compliance was you taught the kids, and the kids would basically pester the parents to make sure about smoke detectors and whatnot. So I think it's an interesting cultural question, and I think it's happening today though. And I think this kind of bottom up and top down, maybe more natural way of, a more organic way of connecting with each other. And if it doesn't work, and that's one of the things I don't know about this project. I don't know where we are today with it. I wish I could kind of complete really that story, because it is such a, I think, a unique step outside of kind of like the technology norm within, let's say, a smaller village. This is the last case study I wanted to share. This is with the National Park Service. It's actually the oldest project that I have here. And what I wanted to talk about on this one, if the first one was really more about connecting with the consumer, and the second one was about not being kind of locked into who you are, this one is really more about process, and this one is about understanding what's important versus what's interesting. And I get trapped in this one all the time. Let me expand on this a little bit more. This is the National Parks Pass. It doesn't exist today because it's actually been superseded by a super pass. I forget what it's called. It's something like the All Government National Parks Fish and Wild Game Pass. It's not as beautiful as this one, but we were actually asked by the National Park Foundation to help them design a service that we realized was all about stewardship. But when they first came to us, one of the things that we did is, what did we do? We became park rangers. This is me in Shenandoah National Park. I'm actually a fee ranger for the day. I am having a blast here. You can see this is me smiling. That picture was taken before I was doing my job because I got fired after an hour of doing my job because there was a 2-block backup of all the cars who were like honking because what was I doing? I was thinking like, I'm playing ranger, I'm gonna help everybody. What I didn't realize, and this is just getting back to the first part, I screwed up because I wanted to help each person as if they were the only people in the world when I didn't realize, no, I just needed to get them through. So that's just a personal thing that it just cracks me up to this day that I got fired from my first job at the national parks. Now, obviously, we did this specifically so that I could be empathetic to the situation. And really, it was through that insight that we were able to challenge the goal of this project. So the goal at this time is every park could have their own annual fee, but there was no such thing as an annual pass for all the parks. So you could get into Yosemite or National Seashore. And what it was is this idea of a national discount entrance fee. The other challenge they gave to us, and it's one that we realized ourselves, is how do you increase park revenue without burdening or stressing the park's resources? So great, you get a discount pass that anyone can go in as much as they want all year. Are you actually kind of shooting yourself in the foot because you're inviting more people in? I have 2 images here, and these were the images as given as kind of gold standards. The first is called the duck pass, the duck stamp. It basically, if you have this stamp in a special book, it allows you to, I hate to say it, you get a shoot duck. But it's a big collectible thing. Actually, people love it just because you have this beautiful artwork, and it's a highly collectible thing. It's $15. It's a way that basically year after year it encourages people to purchase this pass. This other one is not an official pass. It's more kind of a gift shoppy thing. What it is, it's a book, and it has all the national parks in it, and that when you go to a gift shop, you can put a little stamp as if it's your own little passport. And they love that. They love this idea. They thought that that was the insight, that was so interesting. And well, we'll just make it that way because it makes sense. It's the National Parks Passport is what they wanted to call it. What we learned is, no, you can't ask people to have a passport to their own national parks. That's just wrong. The other issue is, what we realized is we didn't want to have discount. We wanted to somehow elevate the experience from discount to advocacy. This idea that I'm not just buying this so that I can get in $2 less than I normally would, but the sense that maybe I'm actually supporting the national parks. I'll actually share an insight. I wish I had this interview in here, I don't. We were talking to someone, we interviewed a person who really loves the national parks so much that they don't go to national parks anymore. They feel as though by them going to their favorite national parks, in a sense, is taken away from the natural beauty. And they had no real function to be able to contribute to the national parks. So we saw this as a unique opportunity that it really wasn't about discount, it was actually more about this advocacy or stewardship. So one of the things that we learned was, rather than creating duck stamps or passports, is that if you were to look in your wallet right now, anything that is of matter to you is probably personalized, whether it has your name on it, your photo on it. If it's some type of coupon to get, free coffee, you might lament if it's not there. But if it has your name on it, you have some type of personal connection, and that's exactly what we wanted to. Our insight was we wanted you to have a personal relationship with the national parks, such that if you were to purchase this, not only would it have your name on it, I actually have mine if you want to see it. It actually does look like that. This is the first one. But not only is it this idea of an integrated membership name, but a photo contest. Almost all people's photos that they love the most more often come from their vacations. Vacations a lot of times are oriented around the locations. People could submit their favorite photograph that ultimately could turn into the next park pass. So this idea that I might even be able to contribute to the next pass. One of the things that was great about this project was it wasn't just about this pass. What we did is we created a full experience. It wasn't just this credit card, but it was in a sense, an out-of-box experience. This is a map that you can't see. I can't see, maybe you guys can see it, showing all the different national parks. And I don't know if you've seen these clever maps that you fold and it pops out. Basically, it's the size of a credit card, and when you open it up, it pops out and shows you all the different national parks, newsletters, websites. We even had it so that you could basically swipe your card so that if you're into birding, they could send you information on birding. So what we realized was it was about this relationship about me and the national parks, what I care about. It's not necessarily a park I'm next to, it's the one that I'm identified with, and designing the overall experience for that. I share this because what was interesting was this idea of we'll create this passport. What was interesting was this idea that we could do this collectible stamp. What was important, though, was not choosing those things and understanding it was about personal relationships. This just putting your name on it is a lot of money. And we had something like $3 to do the overall package, and just putting the name on it was taking up a lot of the money out of this package. But it was worth it. And in the first year, I forget the numbers, but the idea that the idea that people were purchasing this and not ever using it, which was perfect for the national parks, but they felt like this connection, this idea that in a sense, I was giving to the national parks. One thing that I wanted to share with this is this idea to resist quickly jumping to the insight, from insight to idea. One of the things that happens is that I'll do an interview and I'll learn something that just blows my mind. I'm like, I got it, I got the idea. I'm about to present tomorrow to a client in Ohio, and I'm so glad we're not presenting the first idea that I had to them, because I look at it now, and the first idea now looks kind of sophomoric. It looks kind of shallow. And it really wasn't only until we worked through the ambiguity with analysis, something that's really not represented as much on these slides, but this idea that through really thinking through all the critical issues, could I know that what was most important on, let's say, the Parks project was this idea of getting your name on it was really critical. Could we make some very clear decisions? So one of the things that I ask myself is, what's important versus interesting? I find a lot of interesting things on projects. I don't find as many important things. And figuring that out, I have to say, it gets you basically half the battle of finding a good idea. So tomorrow, I'm actually going to share this. You're getting a sneak preview from this project that a client spent a lot of money on. And all along the project, we were having a problem with them. They would say, roasted chicken. And we'd say, roasted chicken, roasted chicken, roasted chicken. And we were not connecting with each other. For some reason, we could not understand why we weren't making this connection. They're foodie people. Sorry, just to let you know, this is a food company. And when they say roasted chicken, they're thinking it's a verb. Roasting is an activity, an oven baked at high temperature. When we say roasted chicken, I'm thinking about all the people I interviewed, and I asked them, what's roasted chicken? It tastes good. How do you roast a chicken? For them, it's an adjective. This is a really subtle difference, but I have to say this is really important. For them, it just means more juicy and tasty. That sounds great. I want roasted chicken. Versus plain chicken, roasted chicken. That sounds great. And so here we were, I kid you not, for 3 months, I didn't quite understand what was going on. This was our total failure throughout the project. And actually, I'll probably pull this slide out. I might need to disguise it slightly. But I think that's one of the problems that we're having with the client. The client, getting back to the first point, are foodies. And they're trying to sell foodies to non-foodies. Well, they want the non-foodies to be foodies. They want them to be as passionate about food as they are. And you know what? They're not. So we just need to remind them, like, no, the customer, it's an adjective, it's not a verb. They are not roasting chicken. I'll give you more of an insight. They don't think you can get roasted chicken from a microwave. You can't get roasted chicken from a microwave, just to let you guys know. So it's these mistakes. It's this idea, in this case, what's important versus what's interesting. That's a really important issue that we're going to be sharing with them. I didn't realize this until I did this presentation. For me, it was more interesting. I'm realizing it's more important because that means they're not making that connection. They are thinking the consumer is more like them, and that's definitely not the case. I think I'm running out of time. One of the things that I will do, though, is I want to close a little bit and just to share some of the things that we've been talking about. This idea that you are not the target market, unless you're a college student, in which you go to Philadelphia University, and if it's only for Philadelphia University students, then you are the target consumer. But for the most part, think empathetically about who you're designing for. It's about them, it's not about you. It also gets you off the hook, just to let you know. It's a really good thing. It's not all about design or engineering or fashion or fill in the blank. Collaboration really is important, and I'm really proud to be able to be sharing this with you. It seems very natural. It's going to be more important, just to let you know. The more collaboration you have, you'll fit in much better with the needs of what's going on in the field these days. Important versus interesting. I'm kind of just throwing the word analysis out there. It's really thinking through and understanding what's important by that. And I just wanted to end with a couple of thoughts on presentation. Now, I'm sharing this. I'm feeling a little awkward here that I put this presentation together. I realize it's like a presentation within a presentation. It's like a double header. So this is me experimenting a little bit. I just wanted to say within the last few minutes here before we go in more of a Q&A is that I think it's more important to show, don't just tell. If you can, show the insights, show the image of the challenge of what's going on in kids' homes in a developing nation. It would have been nicer to show you some of those early learnings with some of the earlier projects. Because if I just tell you, you're really relying on my words, but if I can show you even videos, that's really great. Note to self, show videos next time. I think it's about story versus timeline, meaning so often, and I have to remind myself about this, I want to tell you what happened first, and then this happened, and then this happened. There's a natural sense you want to tell chronologically what happened on your project. But as you make your own presentations, you don't have to follow timelines. I think it's more about a story, and if it's anecdotal, that's great, as long as it does ultimately connect to what was going on, and does that connect to any of the insights or ideas. And one of the things that I have to remind myself is think of this more as about a guided conversation. I actually am looking forward to having a little bit more of a dialogue with you guys. So rather than just presenting work, this idea that, in a sense, for me, I was just giving you a bit of a conversation, a bit one way, about some of the experiences that I've had over the last 12 years, doing things from designing diapers, or actually showing you what happened with one laptop per child. It should feel conversational, and I definitely feel more comfortable talking conversationally, and I look forward to actually just talking with you guys more of in a Q&A, but in a sense, that's my last official slide.